So the war is over, and we are now a free and independent country, the United States of America. Yay! Yay for us! Now what are we going to do? Well, the first thing that most states do is create a constitution. What is a constitution? Well, a constitution is basically a written document that sets out the laws and processes of the government. Okay, so it sets out the laws and the processes of government. And the states write these for two basic reasons. First of all, they want to spell out, what each citizen is allowed to do, the rights that a citizen of that state has. And second, and probably the one that the founding fathers and the state officials really are concerned about, is it would limit the power of the government. Remember, they have just left a monarchy and what they feel is an unfair and unjust parliament and a monarch, the king. So they want to make sure that their citizens' rights are protected. So in order to do that, they write a constitution that would limit the power of the government. In fact, Virginia includes a Bill of Rights. It is actually a list of freedoms that the government promises to protect. So they have a list saying we promise to protect this, and then we promise to protect that. So they actually have a Bill of Rights, which is going to come into play later on in the unit. Now, most state governments are divided into two branches: an executive, and that is a person that carries out the law. All right, think about to execute a search warrant, means to carry it out. All right, so that's usually the governor. And then the second branch is the legislature, which makes the laws. So the legislature makes the laws, and the executive carries out the laws. Remember that. Now, as time is progressing, more voters are getting the right to vote. If you remember back in earlier lessons, it used to be white male property owners, that could only vote. White male property owners. Well, now there's a lot of businessmen, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, carpenters that they don't own property, but they're considered important people in the community. So they start to change the voting rights to white, male, over 21, that own either a certain amount of property or pay a certain amount of taxes. So those shopkeepers, blacksmiths, ship owners, people that run shipping companies, big merchants pay a certain amount of taxes. So they are now given the right to vote. Now, the Continental Congress, remember the Continental Congress, the First and Second Continental Congress, tries to write a constitution for the nation as a whole. But here's the rub. States are very reluctant to give up power. And again, you have to think about, they have been living under the parliament, under the monarchy of a king and the parliament in England. And they do not want to give up that power. And the other thing that you really need to know, in 1780s, these people do not see themselves really as Americans. They see themselves as New Yorkers or Georgians or people from Massachusetts. They felt loyalty to their own states rather than to the nation as a whole. They see themselves kind of like 13 little independent countries. All right? Now, unfortunately, this slide got kind of messed up in the translation from one of my sources to this, so I apologize for this. But in 1777, the Continental Congress did send up what was called the Articles of Confederation. That is going to be our first system of government. And the Articles of Confederation really created basically a very loose alliance of 13 independent states. Okay? The Articles of Confederation went into effect in 1781. Now, each state got one vote. One vote. Now, Congress was able to declare war. They appointed military officers, and they could coin money. Those were their powers. What were their limitations? They could not tax. There was no way for them to raise money. They could make money, make the money, in other words, print it, but they could not tax. And the other thing that was a big problem is there was no executive branch. So they had a legislative branch who made laws, but who's responsible to carry it out? All right? The only thing that they could do to pass a law was if 9 of the 13 states okayed it. Okay? So if you have 8 states say, man, this is a great idea. We think this is good. And the United States says, nope, not going to do it. Nope, no, we're not going to do it. The law does not pass. So that's a big majority. 9 of 13 have to okay it. Finally, there's no system of courts to settle disputes between the states. So if Virginia and North Carolina are having a dispute, who's going to solve that for them? An example I always like to give in classes, Colorado has the Platte River coming out of it. The Platte River runs through Nebraska, but it starts in Colorado. What if Colorado put a great big dam on the Platte River and dried up all the water coming into Nebraska? Well, obviously, today we would take the state of Colorado to court. And I'm sure the courts would rule, no, that's not fair. But back in the 1780s, there is no way for those states to settle disputes because there's no system of courts. And finally, the Articles of Confederation did not provide a way to regulate trade. So Virginia might be trading with a different rate with France than Georgia or Massachusetts. So this is kind of an uneven system of trade between the United States and other countries because there's no way to regulate the trade. So you have to remember, without the power to tax, Congress had no way to repay the debts from the war, and they owe a lot of money, especially to France, and to Spain, mostly to France. They can't raise it. They can ask the states to give them money, but the states aren't required to give money. So we have this big tax burden hanging over our brand new country, the United States, and Congress has no way to raise money. So the continental dollar is absolutely worthless. It's not backed by gold or silver. It's basically just a piece of paper. So what happens? States start to print their own money. And that's going to cause a problem. So, how much is a Virginia dollar worth in New York? How much is a Massachusetts dollar worth in Georgia? Think about it today. Would you like to have to carry 50 types of money? If you're a truck driver and you travel across the United States of America, how would you like to have Iowa dollars and Nebraska dollars and Colorado dollars and Texas dollars? It's a nightmare. So states are printing their own money. The continental or the U.S. currency is worthless, and this creates a lot of problems when it comes to trading between the colonies and states, and this is a big nightmare. Now, one good thing that did come out of the Articles of Confederation was a way to kind of divide the territory and to admit new states. All right. So the first thing they do is they start to survey this land. And if you notice in this picture right here, this is a blown up version of this. Okay, that's right in southeast Ohio. And you'll notice that surveyors have gone and set out boundary lines. So let's take one of these squares. Let's say this one, for instance, right here. And let's blow it up to here. Okay, that's a blown up area. What this is a 6 mile by 6 mile chunk. So 6 miles by 6 miles divided into 1 square mile sections. So there are 36 sections. So 6 times 6 is 36. So there are 36 sections. Okay? So each one of these sections is 1 square mile. So this 6 mile by 6 mile area is known, this whole thing, as a township. Township. Okay? That is that. All right. Now, these sections, these 1 mile sections, and there's 36 of them in a township, can be divided further. So, for all you country kids out there, you farm folks, you'll know that a section is 1 square mile, which is 640 acres. Even today, if you want to buy a section, that's 640 acres, and that's 1 square mile. And that's a big chunk of land. Wish I had some. Okay? But they could divide this into half sections. Say your brother has some money. You and your brother go in and buy a section. You split it. Now each of you have a half section. Or say you have a couple brothers. You might divide it into a quarter section of 160 acres. or a half quarter section, which is 80 acres, and finally a quarter section, which is 40 acres. So this land can be divided into subsequent parts. Other interesting thing about this is that section 16, I'll put it over here, is reserved for the schools. Okay? They might grow crops on that. They might have timber that they would sell. They'd grow crops, and the money that was raised on that would go to fund the school for each township. Pretty cool idea. The other thing I'd like to mention on this is a bargain. Okay, a section, and there's 640 acres, cost $640. So it's $1 an acre. Oh my gosh, I wish land was still that cheap today. So $1 an acre, $640 will buy you an entire section. But remember, most people are not making, and that might be a year's wage. So that's quite of a chunk of change. So that's why they were able to divide it into these subparts. This whole thing that I'm talking about is called the Land Ordinance of 1785. The Land Ordinance of 1785. Okay? So remember that. One other kind of cool thing that the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation set up was the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance. And it sets up governments in the Northwest Territories. When we're talking about the Northwest, remember that the United States stretches from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. Okay? So this area right here is the Northwest Territory. All right? It provides basic rights to the citizens, just like if they lived in the States. It outlawed slavery, which is a good thing. All right? And provided a way for these territories to eventually become states. And how they become states is if these territories would become a state if they have 60,000 residents. 60,000 residents. Once they reach that in the territory, they could ask to be admitted as a new state. So, again, I want to make sure I make this clear, though. We're talking about 60,000 free settlers, all right? Not slaves. So, but it counts women and children. So 60,000 free settlers. So if, you and your wife and your 10 kids come, they are all going to be counted towards that population of 60,000. Okay? Once the states are admitted, they're given the same rights as the original 13 states. So they're not going to be second-class citizens. They're not going to be the original 13 states, but they're going to have the same rights and privileges of the original 13 states. Well, after the Revolutionary War, we fall into a depression, and you're going to see this throughout American history. A cycle of booming economics followed by a depression. And a depression is a period when business activity slows, prices and wages fall, okay, and unemployment rises. And we start to have this develop after the Revolutionary War. So people are unhappy, prices are falling, wages are falling, unemployment is growing. So we are in a depression after the Revolutionary War. Now this depression hits farmers the worst. Okay, during the Revolutionary War, there was a huge demand for farm products, cattle, food, things that farmers are producing. Well, when the Revolutionary War ends, and by the way, farmers had borrowed a lot of money to buy more land, more equipment, more seeds, more tools. Well, when the Revolutionary War ends, the demand for those products fall. Okay, so farmers are in a pretty bad shape. And it gets even worse in Massachusetts. Massachusetts raises taxes on the people of Massachusetts. And when people can't pay those taxes, the state of Massachusetts starts taking farms. Oh my gosh. So can you imagine if you had been a Minuteman or a member of the Continental Army and you've been fighting the British, the oppression of the no taxation without representation, and you get back from all this time fighting and suffering, and you come back home and you find the state that you've been fighting for is now going to take your home because they have raised taxes and you can't pay? I bet you many thought, oh my gosh, I have made a huge mistake. Things were better under the British than they are now. So this leads to a guy named Daniel. Well, it's called Sheas Rebellion. It's led by a farmer in Massachusetts, Daniel Shea, who had been a captain in the Massachusetts military. He had joined the Continental Army. He is so upset that farmers are losing their farms to the state of Massachusetts that he attacks and basically leads this uprising. All right. So Daniel Shea leads about 1,000 Massachusetts farmers. They attack the courthouses. And their goal is to force or prevent, I should say, local governments from seizing farms. Finally, Massachusetts calls out the militia on its own people. So now think about this. These men, and Daniel Shea had fought at Bunker Hill. He had fought at the Battle of Saratoga. He is now being pursued by the Massachusetts militia. All right? And they're able to actually crush this revolt. But the thing that you need to remember is that Shea's Rebellion was a sign that the Articles of Confederation did not work. The Articles don't work. All right? So leaders of the colonies call a new convention to revise the Articles of Confederation, which is going to meet in Philadelphia in May 1787. But what they're going to find out is no matter what they try to do to revise the Articles of Confederation, this document and the way the system is set up is just not workable. So they're going to scrap the whole thing and they're going to come out with a new system of government.